Story 1. It was terrifying. My parents had a bamboo stick and would make me drop my pants and bend over to get spanked. I can still remember the tearful anxiety while waiting for the first spank to make contact with my bare butt. It made me a liar as a child. At that time, I would rather lie than own up to my mistakes because there was no reward for being honest. At least if I lied, there was a chance I could avoid the spanking. I continued lying to my parents throughout young adulthood, even though I was no longer spanked. Luckily, the habit of lying was limited to my parents. Story 2. My dad went beyond just spanking. As a result, it left me terrified that when I had children, I would be abusive too. But I am not. It is actually not hard at all to avoid hitting your children, to avoid tearing them down and calling them names. Story 3. I basically had to learn conflict resolution from scratch as an adult since it was not taught at all as a child. You cannot just yell and use violence to punish others in adult relationships. In real life, violence is not a consequence of your actions unless the situation is very extreme. In relation to that, it was hard to learn emotional regulation and be less reactive. I still have a tendency to snap and an impulse to punish others when they do something wrong. It is not great. Story 4. I had a lot of rage and anger issues as a kid. It turns out that physically hurting people at a young age is not conducive to their mental health. Who would have known? I strongly disapprove of any parent who believes that hitting their child will magically make everything work the way they want. Story 5. I got disciplined when it was deserved. Stopped around 10 years old or so. I am fine and not upset about it. My mother is the greatest person in my life, and I think she is incredible. Story 6. I have no clear memory of the ones I probably deserved. I remember the few I definitely did not earn that were either an overreaction or misunderstanding. The more painful things between my father and me that I still hold on to are verbal, and they occurred while I was already an adult. Story 7. It only happened a handful of times when we were little children. I do not think it has affected us much. I remember one time when I was spanked unfairly. It was the first time I realized my parents could really be wrong. However, I do not think the type of punishment mattered in the end. Story 8. Not horribly, I guess. I would not want to hurt any children I have in the future. It just felt unnecessary. Why must I feel pain because I talked too loud or did not pick up my room? Story 9. I do hold some resentment for my mother, but we have always had a rocky relationship because I know I always got the worst of it between me and my sibling. Now that I work with children, many of whom have been neglected or abused, I have learned that there are definitely ways to handle misbehavior without hitting. Story 10. It did not have any negative effects. My parents spanked us infrequently and never in the heat of the moment. It was a last resort punishment for really bad behavior. We were sent to our rooms for a period and then spanked. It honestly never felt abusive or cruel. Story 11. I'm fine. It wasn't the severe abuse that many people on Reddit think it is. If you try to say that, people respond by saying it's because you were abused that you believe it. So there's no real way to argue that it wasn't a big deal. Many children are physically and emotionally abused by their parents, and declaring all parents who smacked their kids at some point as cold-blooded child abusers is overly simplistic. Most parents are good people who did the best with what they had or how they were raised. I don't have children now, but if I did, I wouldn't smack them because it's socially unacceptable. It wasn't when I was a child, and I didn't expect my parents to be highly progressive. I think it's good that we don't smack children anymore, but I do worry we have overcorrected with never say no parenting and similar approaches. I see children running wild in shops, restaurants, and the cinema, and I wish parents could find constructive ways to engage with misbehaving children. I think in the future, many other forms of punishment will be criticized as harmful child abuse. Bed without dinner, taking away screens, and being made to do chores will all be considered horrible and damaging. Story 12. My mother did this when she had lost control. It impacted my ability to express my emotions. It means I am fearful of highly emotional women. It means I am anxious if I perceive bubbling, unexpressed anger in others. It has impacted my relationships and sense of self. Story 13. I mean, I am a troubled adult, but I do not know how much of its spanking directly contributed to. The only thing I can say for sure is that it was largely ineffective. I learned nothing from it, so I continued to make the same decisions because there were no lasting consequences. A spanking was over in seconds. It was for my parents to relieve their frustration, not to teach any lessons. Once I was old enough to be grounded, that was what really made me reconsider. Granted, I was also grounded for a lot of things that were not my fault, usually related to grades. I was struggling with undiagnosed learning disabilities up until my junior year, so no matter how hard I tried, I struggled in the rigid school system without intervention. That is why I had and have lasting distrust for my parents. Story 14, rarely happened. I can count the number of times on one hand. Every single time it was absolutely warranted, the highest escalation for the worst possible behavior. It was right, it was smart, and it had no negative long-term effects. Story 15. I don't have any lasting effects or memories of it. It stopped once I became an older child. I think excessive spanking is unnecessary. I wouldn't want to do that to my children, but my friend's 2-year-old does not listen to any instructions at all. I think it is because she doesn't get disciplined. Looking at her scares me into thinking I might have to flick my children on the hand or something. Story 16. I have quite a few, I think. I don't recall any adverse effects, but did get a letter from my father saying he was sorry that he spanked me. He said he tried everything else before resorting to spanking, but I guess I was too hard-headed. Story 17. I grew up being spanked with a sandal and belt. When I was younger and finished crying, I vowed to never spank my children. As I grew up and saw kids throwing tantrums and doing crazy things on social media, I thought, wow, that kid needs a spanking. I don't have children, but I honestly don't see myself spanking them. Since that was what made me calm down as a child, I need to read about alternative ways to discipline a child. I do not know how parents handle it when kids test them, but I will figure it out when I have children, and I will make sure to break the cycle. Story 18. The punishments were tolerable. The violence against my mother, the alcoholism on both sides, and the financial abuse are what affected me. Story 19. I feel that spankings never come alone but are accompanied by anger or verbal abuse. My mother would spank me, punch me, and shout at me. Sometimes she would also throw objects. Took me years to learn that you can solve issues without shouting or getting angry. I have had trouble regulating my anger since a young age, and even nowadays I still fear having children and them not loving me. This is just a small part of the whole story, but yes, spanking is not a good idea. Story 20. I got spanked and only learned to lie and hide things from my parents. It is not a natural consequence, such as if a child refuses a jacket, they will be cold. So it teaches nothing except fear of the parent or fear of being caught. If your child is old enough to understand the reason for being spanked, why not just reason with them? If they are not old enough to understand being reasoned with, how do you expect them to understand why they are being spanked? Story 21. Whenever I ended up in a similar situation, my brain instantly went, remember how that turned out last time? Story 22. I didn't get spankings often, but when I did, I rightfully deserved them. It was the indicator in my household that I stood my ground, and once defeated, I had no say or movement. It was defeat, and I yielded every time, so I guess it was effective. I turned out all right. Story 23. I received them regularly for a while after my parents divorced. My mother was very unstable during that time. The only thing I gained from the experience is a strong confidence that I will never raise my hand against my children in any way, shape, or form, no matter what. Story 24. I received spankings and grew up to be a well-mannered, well-adjusted individual. No, I do not spank my own children. Story 25. It made me understand the limits of what I was allowed to get away with. We were punished with a wooden spoon or a firm slap, depending on how bad we were. It never affected me. I grew up to be a responsible adult who takes ownership of my mistakes or failings. Story 26. Wow. Reading all these answers made me feel privileged. I had some spankings. They were rare and harsh, but at some point, I actually learned to be less of a little brat and become more responsible about the housework, homework, and my own future in a positive way. I hold no grudges against my parents. Among anyone, I would still choose them. Story 27. They were very rare and stopped completely when I was around 7 or 8, but as far as I can tell, they did not have any serious impact on me. I did have some anger issues as a child, but that was mostly due to bullying. The only people I ever thought about hurting were the ones who bullied me. Even then, I did not like the thoughts I had about them. As an adult, I do not demand respect from children without giving them the same treatment. When I have conflicts with other adults, I almost never yell and seek a peaceful resolution. I still have some less than kind thoughts about certain people which I will not elaborate on here, but I believe most people would agree they are justified. Story 28. Made me listen to my parents. Learned about respect for authority. Also learned that at that age I was not an authority. Story 29. It was discipline. Sure, it made me lie more to avoid it, but it does not personally affect me now. I would not do it to my children because I do not like the idea of putting my hands on them. There are other ways of discipline that work just as effectively. Story 30. I have a lot of emotional scars, but it's not so much because I was hit by itself. It was because my parents, who didn't know how to be good parents, used hitting as their only tool. They went beyond just spankings. They hit me with inappropriate objects until I was crumpled on the ground, choking and screaming. It was abusive, no doubt. Many others were spanked but turned out fine, but I have decided I am against physical punishment anyway. I got hit too many times for things I didn't even do because adults sometimes misunderstand the situation and won't believe your side of the story. Story 31. To the point that if I ever found out my mother laid hands on boys, she would never see them again. I told her that. She laughed, saying I turned out okay. I lifted my skirt to show the scarring on my thigh from the belt buckle and said I paid for therapy. I know she was a product of the generation. Spare the rod, spoil the child. She never laid hands on my children and spoils them. I wish I had had that version growing up. Story 32. I grew up with health issues and chronic pain. When I was spanked or hit with a switch or belt, I would just stand there and take it, sometimes even laughing at how little it hurt compared to my health problems. It barely affected me except for the humiliation. As an adult, I can't imagine how my parents were so comfortable hitting us like that. Feels pretty disgusting to me now. My mom refuses to hit her grandchildren, which feels like progress. Story 33. I don't like being touched. Period. Sexual activity is fine, but I'm never really present. It feels like it is just happening. Story 34. I have this theory that when people are overly confident or say certain things I would never say, it means they were never spanked as a child. I always ask them, and I am almost always right. I do not agree with spanking and threaten my sister if she ever spanked my niece, which she would never do. Our parents were not horrible people. They just did what they thought they were supposed to do at the time. They were wrong, and there are emotional consequences to that. One thing that came from it is that I became very outspoken to them as an adult once they could no longer spank me, which actually makes for a much better relationship now. However, learning how to self-regulate has been very difficult. Also, my mind still goes into a panic when I know someone is unhappy with me, so there are definitely things I still have to work through. Story 35. I'm not sure, but I can say with certainty that whatever the intended outcome was, it didn't work. I never thought twice about doing something that might result in a spanking due to the threat of a spanking. I just got used to the pain. Then my mom moved up to using a plastic cooking spoon instead of her hand, and when I got used to the pain from that, she got a wooden one. She used to carry it around in her purse to keep my sibling and me in line in public, and she wasn't afraid to hit us with it right in the middle of a store if we were arguing or something. It never stopped either of us. Once again, we just got used to it. I'll say this, though. I don't have kids, and I don't want kids, but I can't imagine grabbing, say, an 8-year-old child by the arm and smacking them repeatedly on the buttocks and legs with a wooden spoon. Story 36. Taught me to be afraid of getting caught or doing the wrong thing, instead of understanding why I shouldn't do certain things. Taught my sister and me that if the other does something we don't like, the appropriate response is to smack them, which would, of course, earn us a spanking for doing the same thing. Story 37. Well, I don't talk to my parents anymore. I've never been able to understand parents who claim to be intelligent but only continue generational trauma. There is a zero tolerance policy, just like there's zero tolerance for the mistakes I made as a child. Takes two to tango, but I will win in the end because I will be alive longer. Story 38. It has left me terrified of my father even as an adult, and quick to become emotionally defensive or dysregulated if someone appears to be any type of threat. Story 39. For me, it absolutely worked. My father would give me many chances to stop doing something I was not supposed to be doing, and when he said, "That's it," I knew I was in trouble. He would pull down my underwear and spank me with his leather belt. I can still feel that after all these years. The problem with the world today is that there is not much of this anymore, and children walk all over their parents and talk back to them. Story 40. My brothers were disciplined by my father. My mother disciplined me. I developed anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorder from hearing my brothers scream while my father hit them repeatedly with a belt. I became fearful of my mother's volatile temper and from being slapped and pinched. I learned to be invisible and to please others. I did not make waves. I became a deeply troubled adult who required years of therapy just to function. Story 41. They were very few and far between. If I got one, I knew I made a mistake and needed a reality check. I definitely behaved after receiving one. Story 42. At the time, it felt like a normal thing to do. I don't blame my father for that. I think he regrets that he used to do that. We have a great relationship. Story 43. Individual anecdotes aside, spankings or other similar forms of punishment are linked to higher rates of suicide, drug and alcohol abuse, criminal behavior, various mental health issues, and obesity along with its related health consequences. None of these outcomes are guaranteed, and it is still more likely that they will not occur. However, such punishment increases the chances of these issues later in life, assuming all other factors remain the same. Story 44. Well, my dad went beyond spanking. He physically hit us from as soon as we could walk. Open palm hits to the face using heavy force. Then he progressed to full beatings on my brother to the point that I, terrified, called the police because it looked like he was trying to kill him. He choked my sister against a wall one time. I mean, the works. He was always violent with us and had an extreme anger problem his entire life. He was a textbook narcissist. Whenever we did anything he deemed wrong, even as toddlers, like when he took me and my sister, who was around pre-kindergarten age, to the park and she fell off the swing pretty hard and got hurt, he rushed over and slapped her badly, openly in the park. If we even mildly irritated him, bothered him at the wrong time, or made a single noise that woke him up, we would get a full slap to the face. I remember my older sister having to call out of school many times because her face was red, bruised, or swollen. I have one memory of my aunt icing my sister's face afterward, but I can't remember what happened that time. I guess this might be irrelevant to your post now that I'm writing this, since you're asking about spankings and I'm not sure if it's the same, but we all ended up severely impacted by it. Regardless of whether it's spanking or worse, growing up with any violence and fear like that severely damages children and affects them deeply. When I think about it now, I truly cannot fathom how a grown, bulky man could put his hands on such a small, innocent child. The thought just truly baffles me. Story 45. This is a tricky one. I was a bad kid sometimes and got the belt for it. But most of this was likely because of undiagnosed autism. I couldn't help it really. Yes, it corrects bad behavior, but some of the beatings really left mental marks. My dad and I have never gotten along, and this is likely why. I think it is needed sometimes but can harm a child if overdone or without understanding the child's potential issues. Story 46. When I was in my 30s, my mom gave me a shirt that said, "I survived the wooden spoon." And I did survive it. I hold no ill will about getting the wooden spoon. I was spanked a lot and I deserved it every time. I have also spanked my kids, but not for years now. The last time I spanked one of my children, my daughter was teasing her brother. Then she ran down an extremely dangerous trail, which was basically a giant rock, and hid behind me so her brother, who has autism, couldn't get her. I spanked her right then and there because she put her brother's life in danger. She knew how he would react and she is older than him. She put him in a dangerous situation. It didn't make me glad to spank her, and I didn't get any satisfaction from doing it. But sometimes corporal punishment is necessary for a lesson to be learned. Story 47. When I was young, autism was not nearly as medically explored or studied as it is today. To my teachers, my family, and my parents, I was just that quirky and problematic kid with intense fixations and a case of hyperactivity. There was no effort to see the world through my mental perspective. I was a problem to be corrected, often by belt, and other times by shouting matches that have left me with a stutter for my entire life. Just because I couldn't understand or learn my multiplication table did not mean I deserved pain. My homework or class curriculum was not worded or presented in a way that connected with my own thoughts. I owe much of my mental trauma, anxiety problems, and failure to express myself emotionally from fear of resentment or reprisal to many people, even those close to me. One could definitely argue that this relates more to physical and mental abuse in a broader spectrum than just belts and discipline, but when it was coming down upon me and leaving a buckle-shaped imprint on me, I could not tell you the difference. Story 48. Children today show less respect compared to over 20 years ago. The main changes are the presence of iPads and phones from an early age and the absence of spanking or discipline. Story 49. It did not really affect me since it was the norm in my culture at the time. I probably will not spank my children if I have any. There are far better punishments that are effective, and I will not have to move a muscle. Story 50. I had a smack on the backside, I think about twice when I was a kid. Both times were from my mother when I had been really over the top, and both times she felt terrible about it. The threat of it, though, was an actual deterrent, and seeing my mother so upset was an even bigger one. I respected my parents a lot more because there was always that possibility if I went too far. I don't feel like my children have that respect because they know that ultimately it is never going to happen. I can totally see why it was banned in the United Kingdom because many parents used the banner of spanking as an excuse to physically abuse their children, but in my case, with fantastic parents, it was used effectively and I was better for it. Please do not think I am excusing the parents who used it as a tool to abuse their children. I condemn those actions, and I feel terrible for anyone who went through that. Story 51. I had a lot of mental problems and was not a very good student. I got in trouble frequently for general mischief. The beatings I received from my father were severe and left me fearful and mentally broken. I began bullying kids at school and would even hit animals like dogs or cats if they did not behave the way I wanted them to. It was not any potential serial killer type behavior, just if a dog or cat misbehaved, I would yell at it and give it a good smack or even a kick. Looking back, I am truly ashamed and disgusted by my actions. I have been nonviolent for over 20 years, and my life has improved in many ways. I finally found my role in society in the creative field rather than the academic field. I repaired and have a great relationship with my parents, a great relationship with my partner who was also physically abused, and a cat who is the sweetest, goofiest furball in the world. I know deep down that I will never get physical with anyone or anything. Story 52. I earned most of the punishments that I received. They taught me that actions and omissions have consequences and to respect authority. Thinking about it, the only punishments I ever received that I did not deserve came from teachers and administrators at school. Guilt by association is unfair. Story 53. I don't specifically remember them, but I remember that they happened. What I remember more is my mother screaming at me every day. That caused emotional damage and decades of resentment. Story 54. It did not affect me at all as far as I can tell. Seeing the other replies in this thread, I think I am the outlier, likely because my parents simply spanked me on the hand or posterior. I was never hit as a child, and I am not entirely sure that I was ever spanked with an object like a belt. I do not necessarily believe it is the best way to discipline a child, especially if used often, which was not the case in my childhood. However, I also do not consider simple spanking itself to be abuse. Story 55. Every spanking I received was well earned by being a brat. However, spankings only happened a few times. I learned my lesson quickly and understood the consequences of my actions. As for today, I am strong-willed yet respectful. I know right from wrong. I am empathetic toward others. and I am a contributing member of society. As an adult, I now understand that everything my parents did, which I thought was ridiculous back then, taught me how to be a responsible and respectful person later in life. Spankings, grounding, rules, and questions before letting me go out. All of it was because they cared and were looking out for my best interests. I have a close relationship with my mom, who was the disciplinarian. I see her every week. I am the child she mostly comes to when she needs to vent or get advice, even though I have a brother and sister. Story 56. My dad made it very clear that actions have consequences. Around the age of 10, he sat me down and spoke to me like a normal person, explaining that actions have consequences. There would be things he asked me not to do, and if I did them, I would be spanked. These were not things like, if you don't grab me a beer from the fridge, you'll catch a spanking. These were simple rules such as, go to school every day, don't cause trouble for the neighbors, don't steal anything. All these rules were clearly laid out with the understanding that breaking them would result in a spanking. I did break those rules a few times. Being spanked never came from a place of anger, and I knew it was deserved. I am 31. My partner of 11 years literally proposed to me yesterday, saying I am the most gentle person she has ever been with. Spankings are not a terrible thing. Bad parenting is. I thank my father a lot for how he raised me. We have a phenomenal relationship, and I am glad he is in my life. Story 57. We were not spanked. Instead, cords and thin sticks were used. It did not affect me and my brother at all. In fact, it kept us well-behaved and smart. Story 58. Learning from this thread that abuse and corporal punishment get conflated. A lot of conversation around corporal punishment is suddenly making a lot more sense. Story 59. Spanking? My dad reached around my intervening mom's head and punched me in the face. I had to pick pieces of my glasses out of my face in front of the mirror, and he asked if I had enough. I received 10 stitches about 1 to 2 centimeters under my eye. These days, we talk about gardening, and I am a somewhat successful engineer. I was beaten up by everyone in my family, and I am cool with everyone now. Story 60. It went beyond spankings. I was hit and thrown around like into walls and other objects. One time, I even left a pretty big hole in the wall. The same kind of treatment happened to my siblings too. I do not really know how well they fared since we are no longer in contact, but I ended up with post-traumatic stress disorder, which feels like an extreme result to say, but I guess that is part of it. Story 61. Definitely a net positive. My parents did a good job not shaming me or anything. They helped me develop self-control. Story 62. I got slapped across the face a lot as a kid instead of on my backside. Women slapping me across the face during sex is a huge turn-on now. Story 63. Well, I never thought to act out in a store because in the back of my mind, I knew there would be consequences. Spankings hurt, but they were never ill-intentioned. Story 64. My husband was a spanked child. Several years ago, we got a dog and 5 years later, a cat. When they misbehave, he hits them. He says it is not hard, but he is a big guy and our dog weighs 65 pounds, and the cat 11 pounds. He is working on not doing it anymore and has gotten a lot better, but at first, he would hit the dog so hard that it would fly sideways. When his therapist mentioned that it likely comes from being spanked as a kid, his father would hit him with a cutting board when he got too big for hands to make a difference. The light bulb came on and he has worked hard to stop hitting. Story 65. I was raised in a Latino household. We did not get spankings, we got a cascaron, similar to a noogie, but more like knocking on the top of your head, or we would get our ears pulled. I do not have children, but if I did, I cannot imagine punishing them with physical pain. It just seems unfair. That said, I think I might have benefited from experiencing it myself. Story 66. I am seeing many posts from people who were physically punished through pain infliction and are traumatized to varying degrees, as well as those who believe spanking, slapping, hitting, and beating were justified and necessary. I want to add a point I have not seen mentioned yet. Many conservative Bible-believing families cite the proverb, spare the rod, spoil the child, or the verse, he who spares the rod hates his child, to justify corporal punishment. They use this piece of ancient wisdom to contradict what psychologists have been telling us since at least the 1950s, that corporal punishment is associated with emotional stunting and dysregulation. If you think your spankings were beneficial, there is a high probability you have adopted a religiously justified narrative. The broader societal move away from inflicting pain on children as punishment coincides with the rejection of certain religious ideas. Story 67. My mom loves to tell the story that she threatened to bring me outside and spank me if I was not quiet in church. I held my chin to contemplate it and asked how hard she would spank me because I was weighing if it was worth getting out of church. I do not think it affected me at all, to be honest. But maybe that story is proof my parents were pretty restrained with it. That does not mean I will be doing it to my kids, though. Story 68. I thought twice about my actions because I knew there would be consequences. It also taught me how to be more subtle and to hide the things I was doing. It toned down my behavior because the worse it was, the more likely it would be discovered, and the more likely I would face punishment. Overall, it taught me to be subtle when I do things that could get me in trouble and steered me away from larger, reckless actions. As I aged, I applied morals to my decisions and used those subtlety skills to navigate actions that are not allowed but benefit others. Story 69. I was spanked many times by my father and mother. My father has anger issues. Despite their love for me, I promised myself I will never spank or beat my son, who is now 3.5 years old. Story 70. I learned my lesson not to talk back to my father or give him attitude when he tells me to clean my room. It only happened once. I turned out fine. It did not affect me later in life. Story 71. I got spanked, but it was very controlled. I usually got sent to my room. Then the adult would come a little later, explain the situation, or ask me if I understood what I did, and then they would switch me a few times. I don't think it had any adverse effects. If anything, I learned the meaning of mess around and find out. I think it stopped around the time I was 8 or 9. My mom went to switch me, and I kicked the switch and broke it. I started getting grounded after that. Story 72. When I was 4, my dad gave me the worst spanking of my life for something I didn't do. It was so bad because I insisted on telling the truth. So he hit me over and over until I confessed. 15 minutes later, he came into my room and said, "Oh, I guess you didn't do it. No apology." A year or so later, I got the second worst spanking of my life, again for something I didn't do. I confessed faster that time. I learned my lesson. From that point forward, I would say whatever my parents needed to hear so they wouldn't spank me. This only prevented spankings about half the time. I still got spanked almost every day. When I turned 10, after they spanked me and I was still crying, they would tell me to stop crying and spank me until I stopped. I've never forgotten the complete lack of empathy that 2 Christians who were full of the love of Christ showed me. They would also slap me across the face or flick me in the mouth for taking a second to think when they asked me a question. Being upset, having the wrong tone of voice, being angry, being frustrated, or talking too much. If I came to them for help, they were more likely to slap me across the face than help me. My earliest memory of my mother is her slapping me across the face and then breaking down in tears while I comforted her. When I was 18, my mom apologized for the way she treated me and wept in my arms. I accepted her apology, but I still don't trust her. My father apologized 15 years later. I accepted his apology, but I still don't trust him. My self-esteem is completely shot. I have no close friends. I've never had a girlfriend. My mind goes completely blank in any tense situation. I had a massive stutter and lisp for years. People seem to like me, but in my heart, I feel like I'm one misstep away from them hating me. I think part of it was growing up knowing that every other person in the world was more important to my parents than me, knowing that my parents would never have my back when I needed it. Story 73. I was very violent as a young man if I was even slightly threatened with violence or aggression. I eventually learned to control that, but I still want to kill anyone who is aggressive towards me. The few years in jail and having a family to support stopped me. Story 74. I am a monster now. I have severe anger issues and anxiety. Being away from my parents is the only way they will stay alive. My sister does not trust me to be alone with my parents. I am working through my mental health challenges. I have nothing else to say. This is a typical family that disciplines their children strictly. They are scared of me now. My sister is my only friend. Story 75. It taught me that God is great, to respect my elders, to work hard, and to never do bad things. Oh wait, that is what having loving parents would have done. It turned me into a violent, angry teenager and young adult. Story 76. My brother became a habitual liar, and one other thing my parents did was verbally harass him when he needed help. Because of those two reasons, he wouldn't tell the truth if it meant avoiding trouble. Was there something he actually needed to bring up? Yes. Will he tell it? No, because he thinks he will get in trouble even if he wasn't responsible. This led to me dealing with issues that could have been easier to fix had he told me on the day it happened instead of several days or weeks later when he found out. It took years to get him to stop doing that, as I had to explain that I wasn't mad at him, but at how he handled the issue. I needed him to tell me so we could deal with these issues when they are smaller, not when they become so big and complicated that they would cost a lot of money. He has gotten a lot better now that he has learned I wouldn't treat him the way our parents did. He has become more honest with me. So yeah, thanks Mom and Dad. Story 77. I do not care at all. Spanking never really bothered me. However, I stopped spanking my children because I saw negative effects and found other methods that were more positive for them. If I had more children, I would not return to spanking. Story 78. Grandparents had patience on my mom's side. Grandma is 92. She regrets spanking us grandchildren. Grandpa is gone. Grandma on Dad's side never spanked us grandchildren. I have a great relationship with her, way better than with my parents. We were punished for messing up. Instead of "don't do that again" followed by a punishment, they should have explained why it was wrong, followed by a punishment. I call my dad every morning. He has openly admitted he was too quick to hit my sister and me. Now my mom? She's next to God and never did anything wrong parenting-wise. I have never spanked either of my kids. They are 14 and 10. I'm often told how well-spoken and well-behaved they are. When asked what I do, I say, when they screw up, I talk to them. People immediately respond, well, that doesn't work for our family. They don't try. It takes consistency. When my kids mess up, they have to explain why they did what they did, how they'll do things differently, and they pick their punishment. If they don't pick, I do it for them. I get creative with it. They've lost privileges. We've sat at the table every evening for 2 hours coloring. I've disconnected all electronics as soon as I've gotten home for a week straight. I've made them do edge work on the lawn with scissors, just to name a few. My oldest daughter is taller than me, but both my kids respect me. My son says yes ma'am and no sir. People just take the easy way out. Story 79. I was spanked a lot, mostly with a belt and by hand. I was paddled once at school. No ill effects that I can tell. I turned out decent, make okay money, have a good job, and a college degree. I am happily married with kids. I have a decent house and good friends. I love my parents and see them all the time. No regrets. I would spank my kids if my wife were not against it. I think my kids sometimes deserve it, but instead they get consequences like no iPad or no dessert. I guess it works okay. Story 80. My mother disciplined me physically for a while, but she also talked to me as if I were a person. At some point, she recognized that physical discipline was no longer effective and stopped. She learned that I responded to words and she was very skilled with them. Story 81. I deserved every spanking I got. I tore up my grandma's rose bush, broke my sister's finger out of anger by hitting it with a hard plastic sword, threw a rock at my other sister's head, accident but knew better, and so on. Every single one I deserved. I learned the consequences of my actions. As a father, I spank my children. However, I have reflected often on my own upbringing, specifically the discipline side of it. The general consensus of society is that spanking causes trauma and is abuse. I find this to not be entirely true. It is too simple a statement. I believe it is not the spanking that's traumatic, but the reasoning and the way it is done. My father never once chased me, grabbed me, and went to town spanking me while yelling. In fact, it was the opposite. He would sit quietly on something and tell me to come over to him, to move my hands and bend over his knee. He would spank me however many times I had earned, quietly, then let me cry if I cried. He always made a point to come back afterward and explain to me exactly what I did, how it affected people, and why I had to face the consequences of my actions. It was always a learning moment. As a father who is a health enthusiast with 18 years and counting in the fitness world, and someone interested in the psychology and physiology of violence, I have come to the conclusion that my father did this for both of us. I deserved punishment and needed to learn, but without being traumatized. He knew he would traumatize me if he didn't remain calm. If your child did something deserving of a spanking, you are upset emotionally with a heightened heart rate. If you chase the child down, your heart rate will elevate further. Being emotional with a heightened heart rate makes it harder to control your emotions, so when you spank, you will most likely yell and maybe spank a little harder or more than needed. It is the yelling, perceived as anger by the child, and the physical spanking that creates trauma. If you remain calm, you can control your emotions. Sit down and tell the child to come to you. They will eventually. Allow the time for them to comply or suffer an emotional outburst yourself. Your calmness will not be perceived as anger by the child, but more as a disciplining nature. You make them do the work of being ready. This keeps your heart rate down and gives them more time to dread the inevitable, which is the true teacher of consequences. The long dread is worse than the spanking. When the spanking happens, it is not the pain of the hit that hurts, it is the landing of disappointment that hurts the most. Looking back, my father never left a mark on me. I have never left a mark on my son. In fact, I spank quite softly. It is the dread leading up to the spanking that teaches him the consequences, and it is the calmness in which I do it that ensures he is not traumatized. These are just my opinions, and so far my children show no sign of being negatively affected by spankings. Do not think I spank my kids left and right. The consequences have to match the act that got them in trouble. Spankings are reserved for the worst offenses, which rarely occur. Story 82. It did not. I did things my mom did not like. She punished me as hard as she could, locked me in my room, and repeated this until I was too big. Now, I am not scared or anything. I just move on. Story 83. I only got spanked if my dad said, "If you do that again, I'm going to spank you," and then I did it again. He would make me go to my room and wait 10 or 15 minutes, which was actually the worst part for me. The waiting was worse than the spanking itself. As an adult, I realized my dad wanted to be calm and collected before he came in. Then, usually, there were 2 to 4 swats across the buttocks. I was never scared of my dad. We're still close, so I don't think it affected me negatively, but I am just one person with one opinion. Story 84. The practice mostly stopped when we were very young and was largely unnecessary. I do not actually remember it happening. There was certainly plenty of psychological warfare as I grew up, for which I am still in therapy. Story 85. Only got them when I deserved it. I think we should bring back public floggings. Society could seriously benefit from it. I am likely a minority in this, but I feel daily that some of the behaviors grown adults display would not happen if 20 lashes in a public square were their future. Story 86. I turned out just fine. I was disciplined with belts and switches. Now I am an adult who sees a misbehaving child and thinks that child needs to be disciplined. Story 87. It created a permanent rift between me and both of my parents. I felt unloved and unlovable for many years. Story 88. I am fine and deserved most of the punishment because I was a bit difficult. When I had children, I continued the same spanking routine that I experienced as a child. If you misbehaved badly, you would get spanked. One day, I reached out my arm to get something from my child's wardrobe, and they ducked away and cowered for a moment. I was shattered. I realized I had caused this. My child was afraid of me. I have never spanked them since. Story 89. Let's just say that I am still seeing both a psychologist and a psychiatrist more than 40 years later thanks to my parents. Story 90. The pat on the bottom wasn't bad, and I learned from it. The beating with a belt made me hate it. I also have a hard time standing up for myself. When raising my kids, I used the pat. I only had to use it once on my daughter, and she learned. It didn't affect my son at all, so I found another way to handle him. Story 91. It didn't happen. My mom only ever spanked me. My dad never did, maybe because I am female. When I was about 4 years old, I intentionally upset my mom knowing a spanking was coming. I had a plan. I was going to laugh at her when she spanked me, hoping that would stop her from spanking me again. Things went as planned. I kept yelling at her from across the house, though I cannot remember what I said. She came in and did spank me. Even though it hurt, I laughed the whole time. She never spanked me again. Story 92. For unrelated reasons, I do not talk to my father anymore. However, I believe that overall it was beneficial. Story 93. Spanking was a lazy method used by the older generation to discipline a child through fear rather than actually spending time parenting the child. This approach is often associated with the baby boomer generation. Story 94. I was humiliated, and who knows the psychological damage, as I am a bit unusual and experience panic attacks. I blame them on the sexual assault by a family friend and being asked to keep it quiet by my mother. But who knows? Oh, the 1970s, the good old days. I believe the complete ban on corporal punishment is why the world is so problematic now. Story 95. I don't like calling it that. Spanking, to me, is a sexual thing. I know I'm the odd one. What my parents did was not spanking. It was child abuse. Story 96. It did not. However, spankings were rare and never in the heat of the moment. We had to do something truly naughty to receive a spanking. Story 97. We have sufficient studies on this topic, so there is no need to ask individuals who will not be able to provide a proper answer, as their personal experience is heavily biased by their attachments. It is a fact that all forms of physical punishment lead to some form of trauma. End of story. Story 98. I experienced harsher punishments such as spanking, leather belts, and electrical cords, and I turned out okay. I will do the same with my own children if they misbehave. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.